The makers of Camel cigarettes bring the world's latest news events right into your own living room. Sit back, light up a Camel, and be an eyewitness to the happenings that made history in the last 24 hours. The Camel News Caravan presents Today's News Today. Produced for Camel Cigarettes by NBC.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you. The veil of secrecy was lifted dramatically today from one of the year's leading spy thriller stories of international intrigue. The hero of the piece is a man who has lived secretly in the United States for 8 months after quitting a top security job in Red Poland. It's reported for us now by David Brinkley at NBC News, Washington.
Today, the government produced before a press conference here in Washington a high-level Polish security officer who fled his Russian-dominated country, asked asylum in the West, and got it. He is Joseph Swayze0223. He was number 2 man in Poland's security program. He said today, through an interpreter, there is a great resistance movement in Poland against the Russians, but because of the Red Army, it is powerless. He further says most Poles are convinced the Russians, not the Germans, murdered those Poles at the Katyn massacre in World War II.
Przez 5 lat miałem możliwość poznać prawdę.
He also told what he knew about the disappearance 5 years ago of the American brothers Noel and Herman Field and Noel's wife Herta. Noel went to Czechoslovakia and disappeared. His wife and his brother went to look for him and they disappeared. He said today all 3 of the Fields now are in communist prisons. The State Department said today it has demanded their release.
Tak zwana przyjaźń między Sowietami a Polską.
Otherwise today, Republican Chairman Leonard Hall spoke at the press club on the prospects for this fall, then answered some questions. One was, what effect will McCarthy have on the election?
I've traveled around 100,000 miles in the last several months, and I think when you speak of the McCarthy Army situations and others like that, the people have become sick and tired of the whole situation. And to my mind, anything with respect to that will not have one iota of effect on the election this fall. I think the people have heard enough.
Also, Hall predicted the Republicans will gain 15 to 25 seats in the House this fall, so the next question was...
I have one final question. Do you want to bet?
Up in my state of New York, if it's known that you made a bet, you can't vote. So if I can meet you somewhere, why, we'll have to discuss that.
Whatever bets were made are payable November 3rd. Now back to Camel News headquarters in New York.
The McCarthy question was also put today to a leading figure in the controversy. And for this story, we switch to NBC's Ray Scherer at KOA-TV, Denver.
Presidential callers here, Army Secretary Robert Stevens and Chief of Staff General Matt Ridgway. Having spent 14 long days on the stand, Stevens is asked to comment on the McCarthy censure story.
I've been asked the question of whether or not I had any comment in regard to the report of the Select Committee, chairman by Senator Watkins. I feel that this is a matter entirely up to the Senate, and it would be most inappropriate for anyone in the Department of the Army to express any opinion or make any comment upon it. So we do not have any comment on that particular point.
Then the other caller at the summer White House, General Ridgway, speaks up on atomic weapons and how they affect the size of the Army.
I was asked whether, in my opinion, there appeared to be a lesser need for manpower in the Army of the future in the event of war than in the past. I would reiterate what I have so often said before, that we see many positive indications, all the result of honest, objective, analytical reasoning on our part, that rather than a decrease in the requirements for manpower in the ground forces of the future, there is very likely to be an increase. What I should like to give particular emphasis to as a support for this simple reasoning is the enormous stake that we as a nation have in the event of another world war. Because it is my conviction that another world war the stake is the independent survival of the American people as a sovereign nation. And there must be no mistake in these major problems or the solutions to these problems in national defense.
Now to John Cameron Swayze in New York.
It appears tonight that the key issue before the nine-power conference on German rearmament, which opens in London tomorrow, is the keeping of controls on any such rearmament. Mandes France proposed today that a seven-nation armaments authority be named to keep appropriate brakes on the rearming program, but this did not meet approval. The majority seemed to favor the North Atlantic Treaty Organization exercising control. A compromise is needed. Here at home, on a vastly different subject, the World Series. The Giants met the Indians on the eve of the series on a combined warm-up session.
At the Polo Grounds on this Series Day -1, the Giants previewed this starting lineup with which they hope to win their first World Championship since 1933. In their last series appearance in 1951, they lost to the Yankees 4-2. Today's warm-up brought the rival league's leading batters together, Bobby Avila and Willie Mays. Bob Lemon will face Sal Magley on the mound at the opening. As the Indians wound up practice, they were 9-5 favorites to make it 3 World Championships without defeat. Cleveland has been in 2 series before this one, 1920 and 1948, winning both. When these Indians enter the Polo Ground again tomorrow to play ball, they'll probably be working under partly cloudy skies with readings in the low 70s and a sellout crowd of 55,000 in the stands.
Hello, I'm Rex Marshall, and I have some gentlemen here that I'd like you to meet. On this night before the World Series opens, we're very pleased to present 5 of the American League champion Cleveland Indians. And incidentally, I'm also pleased to make mention of the fact that they all smoke Camels, America's champion cigarette. Well, let's lead off, I suppose I should say, with the gentleman who is going to lead off tomorrow, Bob Lemon. Bob, how do you feel the night before the big opener?
Well, I feel great, Rex. Same way I feel about Camels. They taste good, and they're mild.
Well, good luck to you, Bob. And now here's another 20-game winner, none other than Early Wynn himself. Early, are you going to live up to your name against the Giants?
I'm sure going to try, Rex. The series is something special, just like Camels.
And now here's another one of these well-dressed Cleveland Indian pitchers, one of the big 3, Big Mike Garcia. What do you say, Mike?
You can't beat Camels for mildness and pleasure.
Just for a switch here, let's meet a catcher. I certainly should say the catcher of the Cleveland Indians, Jim Hegan. Jim, you certainly know how to handle these pitchers.
With these guys, it's a pleasure, like smoking Camels.
And also, I thought it would be fun for you to meet the gentleman you just saw in that bit of film there, none other than the American League batting champion for 1954, the one and only Bobby Avila. Bobby, I see you smoke the one and only Camels, too.
Sure do, Rex. Camels give me more pleasure.
Well, we certainly appreciate you fellas coming around to see us tonight, and good luck up at the Polo Grounds tomorrow. Fans, why don't you take a tip from what you've just heard? For more pure pleasure, why don't you try Camels yourself? You know, no other cigarette is so rich-tasting, yet so mild as Camels.
Overseas, in England, powerful elements of the British Labour Party have come within 2% of taking control away from the moderates.
The moderates won today, endorsing West German rearmament only after Attlee again called for talks with Malenkov.
Whether in or outside, to deal with the imminent dangers to our whole civilization. Everything else falls below that. I've mentioned one other point. I've stressed it again, that communism is successful where conditions are bad. Communism fails where conditions are good.
Myron Bevan, much farther left, has picked up enough strength to come within just 2% of taking control.
In our feature section tonight, we have a report on that growing legion of Americans drawn together by cars too old to be junk. It comes from Jack Angel at our newsroom in Chicago.
Well, if you're old enough to remember back from the air age to the machine age, then this is for you. At Beloit, Kansas, they sort of meet as the Camel newsliner flies in for the town's famous old car derby. The reception committee is powered by a 1900 Veely 10 and a 1911 Mercer, which becomes an improvised camera car for NBC's mount. And eventually we wind up on the main street of Beloit, where a crowd is ready for the best polished parade of old-timers it's ever seen. And though Kansas is host, the old beauties come from everywhere, mostly under their own steam, particularly the Stanley steamers. And it's a beautiful sound they make, these well-preserved engines against a background of Legion band music. Here's an ancient Hudson, soon to be flanked by one of the Maxwells at the Derby. What's this, an Apperson? There's a catch to all this, though, provided by the early 1900 automakers called a crank.
Get on your mark, get set, go!
You see, you got to crank 'em to run 'em. So the first of the handicap events is the cranking contest, and it isn't easy. No, not a bit. Well, finally we got one out. The first one out is a 1911 Maxwell of a genus which left us shortly after the invention of the self-starter. And if at first you don't succeed, it probably won't help a bit to try again, but you can if you want to. Main event at the fairgrounds is the races, and there's no coddling these old warriors. They really go. It speeds up to 40 miles an hour. They don't build them like this anymore, and the problem of the moment is how long are they going to stay built? There are a dozen survivors narrowed down to a stretch drive between a 1914 Ford touring car and a 1918 Ford runabout. And old Henry himself would be a proud one as the 1914 machine clatters in first in a record unclocked but considerably under a day. And look at this, would you? The most beautiful old line since the Ziegfeld Follies. Now, back to New York.
Wouldn't mind riding in one of those myself, but I wouldn't like that cranking. How about you? Hopscotch of the world for headlines. Cairo, Egypt. A small Israeli freighter has been accused by Egypt of attacking an Egyptian fishing boat near Suez. 3 fishermen reportedly were killed. The Israeli boat was trying to go through the Suez Canal, and both the vessel and the crew have been taken into custody. Israel has denied the accusations. Trenton, New Jersey. We of the News Caravan are happy tonight to note that we have again won the Blue Ribbon Award given by the New Jersey State Fair for public service through the dissemination of news. The fair at Trenton makes the award each year. Thank you very much. San Diego, California. It was revealed today that units of the 7th Fleet early this month moved into position around Formosa to resist any communist Chinese attack on that island. Sioux City, Iowa, a 5-county search was undertaken today by businessmen, housewives, Boy Scouts, soldiers, it seemed everyone, for 8-year-old Jimmy Brenner, who disappeared a month ago. Let's wish them luck. And that's the story, folks. Glad we could get together. This is John Cameron Swayze saying good night for Camel, the cigarette that gives you more pure pleasure, because no other cigarette is so rich tasting, yet so mild as Camel.
If you want extra mildness in a fine-flavored cigarette, try king-size Cavaliers, blended of extra fine, mild tobaccos. Feel that mildness. Yes, feel that mildness. Taste that flavor. That's a Cavalier. Cavaliers are king-size, yet priced no higher than leading regular-size brands.
The Camel News Caravan is brought to you every night, Monday through Friday, by the makers of Camel cigarettes.